Watch this. No way!
Joe's just promised this is going to be over in 40 minutes to his wife, which I think is probably a smidge ambitious.
Very.
For the podcast. Let's do this properly. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Cookie Jar Golf Podcast. I am Tom Mills, and today I think this guest is long overdue, considering we're 190 odd episodes in, and I've known you pretty much since day dot. Joe McDonnell, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Tom. Yes, long overdue. Good to be here.
Joe is kind of a mythical creature in the world of golfing Twitter, I suppose. How do you describe yourself, Joe?
An unabashed
an anomaly,
an unabashed fan of the game, particularly history and evolution of courses, and visualizing ideas. I know that doesn't sound like anything useful, but
visualizing ideas. What does that mean?
So the current role I play with CDP is to help concepts look sensible and compelling, and get the point across that's trying to be made by the architect. So if there's a change to be made, or some new hole or new course, even if we can show it in a way that the people on the other end, or the people, let's say, with the money, are going to sign it off because they say, yes, I get it, I can see it, they've got context, I see what you're getting at. So yes,
and
I
the
believe
members,
in you.
Of course.
And the members and the committees and whoever else that's in charge of saying yes.
So
to
you
these
get
things.
a plan from an architect,
yeah,
and you kind of do some computer wizardry, and you get kind of a visual, computer-generated 3D model that you can do all kinds of bells and whistles with.
That's the aim, yes, basically.
How on earth, before I will ask how on earth did you get to doing that, which I'm about to ask, just need to caveat that with, this episode is not about you, and we can't make it all about you,
no.
As much as I'd love to.
No.
For those people that are listening that have read the title and are interested, this will be about the course evolution of Hoylake, which is slightly different from Royal Liverpool, and I'm sure we'll get into it. This is going to be accompanied by another podcast with Stephen Proctor, which is kind of like the club evolution of Royal Liverpool. So that's where we are going, but we will get there. We need to first establish the background of this genius that is Joe McDonnell. So how on earth do you get into doing visualizations and creation of graphics in this way?
Personally, I love the use of genius. That's
I'm liberal with it.
in the modern sense, as in not. Yes, I got into it through just pure love of the sport, love of the game. It was a sort of passion. I was delving deep into archives of Hoylake, where I've been a member for a long time, since childhood. And because there's such a rich wealth of historical stuff on the course, particularly in the hallways at the club, and multiple books written about the place by members and others, that there's so much to go on that it really got me down a rabbit hole, and I was just loving it. And the stuff that really took my fancy was how the course has changed. Excuse me. There are lots of sort of pre-1900, late 1800s links courses, particularly that have changed massively before they sort of settled. Yeah. Lots of sort of Hoylake's peers and those who came shortly afterwards also went through massive amounts of change, whilst the game was finding its way and fashions were changing quite quickly. But Hoylake has continued right up to today to change and evolve with the times and the equipment and tastes, fashions, whatever.
In kind of getting to where you are professionally, do you use, am I right in assuming you still use a lot of topographical information, and you do drone surveys and you use all that information, which comes from a kind of a previous life, a life that you're still doing, which is the artwork. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about the artwork and what that type of stuff that involves.
I was messing around with techniques to try and visualize ideas that I had, to try and show things that may have changed over the years that I found really interesting, seeing how holes and courses have evolved. And I've always been a watercolorist at school, and after school I've painted watercolor paints. My particular style was after somebody called Graham Dean, who's a local artist to where I live on the Wirral. And he uses watercolour out of the tube straight onto the paper. It's wet on wet watercolour, very, very loose style. And just through experimentation and modern tools, I found a way that I could simulate that style with digital watercolour brushes. And combining that with 3D modelling and, like you say, the modern techniques of gathering LiDAR data and photogrammetry techniques with drones, we're able to combine the two. So I can paint onto the surface of a 3D model, shine some extreme low light across the model surface, extreme low light, and you can make even the flattest course look like it's the Himalayas. So
yeah.
There you go.
And your artwork is not only absolutely stunning, by the way. I've got a piece hanging up in my office, which is it's a piece that you sent me that's of the old course, and it sits above my monitor in my room. My office has no windows, so whenever I'm in a really dark dungeon, well, no, really, I'd love a window, but when I'm in a really dark dungeon, I just look up at that piece of art, and it always makes me think of the 150th. Actually, makes me think of going back to St Andrews. Your artwork's not only beautiful, but it's also factually really accurate, isn't it? It's like,
I hope so. Yeah, we try to. What we work with is the most up to date possible sort of survey data that we can get hold of. The beauty of what I was doing, it ties into the Hoylake evolution stuff, is that with working with LiDAR data and various other bits and bobs, you can highlight contours and features of the course that are perhaps no longer in play. Hoylake being an example. And I'm sure basically every course, particularly Golden Age courses and sort of pre-1900, will have all kinds of features that have been lost to changes in routing and whatnot. So footprints of bunkers and lost teeing grounds and greens even.
Because you can see that in that. So what's LiDAR mean? What does
LiDAR is light detection and ranging. So it's a digital technique that's been around for a long, long time. It's a sensor that bursts. It bursts
photons?
Photons. Lasers towards a target in a spray and then receives them back in the sensor.
Okay, like radar, but for light instead of radio.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah,
well,
there are certain types
even I can understand that with my...
Even you can. But there are certain types of LiDAR you can get. You can get penetrative, ground penetrating LiDAR, which archaeologists use and things like that.
Okay.
But the LiDAR we're talking about, the sort of standardly available stuff, like the stuff you got with your phone, like modern phones have a LiDAR scanner on them.
Do they?
Yeah, so they've got LiDAR sensor on Apple.
Is that how they focus?
iPhone 12 onwards. No, it's
what's the purpose?
It's a different thing.
What's the purpose of it on a phone?
Well, it can be used for depth perception. You can make a model of your living room.
Bloody hell. Well, let's not get too far down the rabbit hole.
That's a different story.
So this sort of passion that you had for looking at, the magnificent hallways of Royal Liverpool Golf Club and the history that's there, and then combined with your kind of knowledge of these LiDAR techniques and all the topographical information you get, led you to kind of investigate the history of Hoylake. Now, first of all, the Open, 151st Open's coming to Royal Liverpool this year. People are going to call it Royal Liverpool. Some people are going to call it Hoylake. What's the difference?
Well, there is no difference really. It's local terminology, sandwich, it's the same sort of thing. It's just that it was the Liverpool Golf Club. The funny thing with this one is, Sandwich is at least in Sandwich.
Yeah.
The Liverpool Golf Club was founded by some gentry who named it after, it was the Liverpool Hunt Club, which was the existing horse race course that was there in the very earliest days of the golf. And there are a few members who would press you on the fact that we weren't a golf course that was played over a race course. It just wasn't the case. The 9 holes were laid out in a deliberate fashion to try and avoid the race course wherever possible, for obvious reasons. The posts were an issue and the hoof prints were an issue. So really, if you look at the original 9-hole layout, it didn't really use the race course track. Per se, there was one hole that
is that the rhetoric that it used the race.
Well, it can easily be confused. I think the case was they were trying to avoid it, but they cohabited for a couple of years. I think there were only a handful of race meetings at a time where the golf was played there, and then it moved. I think they moved their base of operations, and horse racing slightly fell out of favour around that time. I mean, it continued on, but it wasn't as popular.
So you've got this feature of Hoylake where you've got the internal out of bounds off the club's first open three, the third hole, the open routing. Now, I know that's something to do with the racetrack. Is it or not?
So, out of bounds is a funny one. It's a big one. This could have a 2-hour podcast on its own.
Well, Tom Simpson said he liked out of bounds.
Well, absolutely. But I should lead off by saying that if you don't like internal out of bounds, that's fine. That's totally your choice, your prerogative to decide you do or don't like the thing. But it is there. It's just there, and it's not going anywhere. That internal out of bounds of the practice ground at Hoylake is going to stay indefinitely. And
well, it's going to be. I think it's all tented village.
Well,
and
it is
stuff
for
like
sure.
That for the open. So
it actually comes in very
but
handy.
is that something to do with the racetrack? Was that where the track was?
No, it was
around
a field.
that?
So if you go right back to the very earliest days, pre-golf, and you look at the old what were called tithe maps, and that was how land was divvied up into compartments where people would rent land from the lord of the land, who was at the time Lord Stanley of Alderley. And he would rent out parcels of land, some famous names, but John Ball Senior, who was the proprietor of the Royal Hotel, which was built in late 1700s, and then he was the head dude at the Royal Hotel, and also
love that he's the head dude,
and also had a house which is just behind James Bledge's current abode. Which was ploughed down in the 60s because it went into disrepair.
James Bledge, course manager Royal Liverpool, and he lives just just
off our 8th tee, in the back of the 6th green. John Ball Senior was living there, and he had some animals, some livestock. Also was in charge of the rabbit warren, which was sort of another source of income. So
they loved rabbits back in the day, didn't they?
Rabbits were a good source of income. You didn't have to do anything.
Yeah,
you just shoot them and go get them. So it was pelts and meat. So rabbits and racing and golf were coexisting for the first 10, 15, 20 years of the course's life.
And are there any holes that resemble the first 9 holes that were laid out, and what do we know about the course as it was laid out initially, and who by, and give us a brief synopsis.
Coming back to that one, because I glossed over the out of bounds because I got down a literal rabbit hole. The out of bounds is a funny one because Hoylake's boundaries were quite fluid in the early days. They weren't totally settled. Housing was popping up at the same time as the golf. Because it was a beachside town in that era, the popularity of living near to the seaside was growing. This Victorian sort of going to the seaside destination, good for the lungs, take the ozone. That stuff was really kicking off. And of course, train travel. The boundaries were fluid and they were moving. And the out of bounds were at the time when they were set. The course was set up initially. Out of bounds literally was out of bounds. It wasn't the land owned by the club.
Yeah.
So it was a field, particularly the one inside the racetrack. It was just a field. It was livestock. It wasn't arable because it was, of course, links land, which isn't very good for farming foods and such. So, it was out of bounds. And then over time, what happened was the club managed to secure more land and actually lost some, but in the process got land back. And with the boundaries moving, what you had was decent holes that were part of the routing that they didn't want to sacrifice now that they'd acquired more land. So you had internal out of bounds popping up.
Yeah.
So we think, but we're not sure, that the practice field inside the 1st and 16th actually wasn't leased by the club in the very earliest days. So the out of bounds was just part and parcel of not being leased by the club. And then over time, whilst the club acquired that, and it became what we now know as the practice ground. Of course, practice wasn't a thing in 1869.
I don't think it's a thing for some of us now.
Exactly. So we acquired land, and by virtue of that, we had internal out of bounds.
Yeah.
Perhaps the most famous after the practice ground is what was left of 7. The Dowie hole, the famous, infamous Dowie hole. And that was, in old pictures, you can see it, the cop, these tall turf walls, which denoted boundary edges. I digress again, but the copse we just found recently, Anthony Schoen, our head trustee, has found information that said not only were the copse used to keep your livestock in, within your field area, but also they might have been used as flood defences.
Oh, really?
Which makes a lot of sense because our land down by where current 8 and 9 are, the far and the punch bowl hole, they that would flood quite regularly. It's the lowest lying part of the course, and it was really unfit for golf in the earliest days. Hence the reason why the sort of in the early days using around the race course seemed to be the best piece of land to start with. Yeah. So coming back to your question, the earliest layout of the course was it was set up by James Muir Dowie was the club's first captain, but he was also the instigator of the club to get a club going, and he by marriage was related to the Chambers family, who were Scottish, well-to-do folk, and also well embedded within the game of golf up in Scotland. So Chambers and George Morris, one of the older brothers of Tom Morris, came down and at the behest of James Muir Dowie and others to lay out 9 holes across this piece of land, which they thought would be good for golf. Now, the crucial part is it's very, very flat. We all know this, Hoylake and flat, they are synonymous, we know this. But the reason they chose this particular bit of land was, as I say, the rest of the sort of surrounding stuff, the dune land and such, was unusable at the time, not without huge amounts of finance and effort. And technology that just wasn't there in the day. Horses and carts and stuff wasn't going to get the job done.
Wasn't going to cut the mustard.
No. So they were playing across what was ready-to-go land, I mean, ready to go in certain respects, but early stories of the hole that now plays as our field hole, which is 13 for the members, the green round there was surrounded by the rabbit scrapes.
Yeah.
And it was really heavily affected by rabbit scrapes. Over time, they managed to turn those into formalised bunkers, or at least, something that resembled.
Oh, really? That badly damaged?
Yeah, it was just holes everywhere. So that was the sort of epicenter down where the bit of patch of gorse is on our drive on the first, on the left by the fence, right over to where the 13th green is. That was absolutely pockmarked, full of rabbit scrapes. So that was the epicenter. So they used the land around the practice field because it required the least effort. Yeah. And in those days, because it was such a sort of early forage into golf in England, the idea of pouring huge amounts of cash into something before it really had a chance to get going and take root would have been a sort of mad investment, really. So
we've got our 9-hole route in, and this was laid out roughly
1860. Well, 1868 was the layout, and then the actual put into practice and open for play in 69.
In 69. How long did we play 9 holes before things started to change?
Quite quickly. It did take hold. The game got popular, as you know, and the club was starting to sort of get bigger, grow with membership and interest. And as it did so, they realised that 9 holes wasn't enough. It was popular. Let's get going. Let's do something expansive. So they looked at the portion of land where our current 8th is, and 7 and 8, in fact, in those two holes running towards the fence line. They I think in the early iterations, it first was 12 holes and then quickly went to 18. But in the earliest iterations of 18 holes, it was crisscrossy and mad. I mean, it was real shoehorning 9 holes into that small stretch, which now you've got 2 or 3 holes was occupied by almost 9 holes. Just
before you press on, I just want to check. Are there any holes that exist in their entirety from the original 9?
The closest we had our second green before it was changed recently, was the last sort of remaining green site from the original 9. Okay. The closest we have to a hole that plays in the same direction to roughly the same green site from roughly the same tee is our 18th, the stand hole.
Okay.
The initial green was actually left of where it is today, but it basically played in the same direction. So that's as close as we get.
Yeah, okay. So we get this rapid growth of the game in England. Obviously, it was already taken off quite heavily in Scotland, and we get this growth of the game, and we developed 12 and 18.
Yep.
What do we get in sort of well-known course architects at the time? How does that process work?
Well, it was architecture as a term applied to golf. It didn't really exist at the time. So there are a lot of people who did great things who weren't necessarily credited in the way that we would today. Jack Morris came down with his uncle and with Chambers as part of the the party.
His uncle being Old Tom.
No, well, yes, but his uncle being George, who was laying out the original line with Chambers. So Jack Morris came down with them, and he installed himself as the club's first pro, and was there for, I think, about 60-something years.
Oh, wow.
Until he died.
Vocational stuff.
Serious. Lifer. And he came down and was instrumental in some of the club's early formation, and carried on being instrumental right up to, I think, when he died I can't remember when he died. I think it was just pre-World War II. But the sort of architecture as a term didn't really exist. But he, if anybody, should be credited with some of the early moves of the course to move it to 18. And then later, some very influential members, names who you recognise like Ball Hilton and Jack Graham, were very instrumental in how the course evolved. There was an improvement of the first 18 holes quite quickly when people realised that it was lethal when you crisscrossing over people's heads. So they improved the course, which meant tinkering with the existing 9. Because the existing 9 and then this first iteration of 12 and 18 just involved tacking on holes to get you back to a certain place in the routing. Whereas, excuse me, clear the frog. The subsequent 18 made better use of the land, and it started to get better and better. And then as they approached the 1890s, they realised.
Do you want a drink? Are you going to be okay? You take a
need
drink.
a bit of coffee.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm dying here. Hang on.
You have a little drink. I don't want you to die on a podcast.
Sorry, it is the
As a
morning.
former musician, I thought you'd be good at handling a microphone.
Microphone is not the problem. It's just the enormous amount of phlegm in my throat. So the course evolved, and as we got into the 1890s, the game was getting better and better. People's understanding of what makes for good holes was getting better. There were more influential players joining the club, and as such, the club was thinking, can we get an open here? And they would need to make certain changes to make the course better and worthy of an open. Part of that was moving the clubhouse. And this is where things get sticky with the routing. So in 1895, the clubhouse officially moved to where it is today, having been at the Royal Hotel.
Which is somewhere near the 18th tee.
That's correct.
So that hole that you say was somewhat like what the original hole was.
Yeah.
That was from the clubhouse, the old clubhouse,
yes.
and you play down the first, or something like the first.
Which made a lot more sense.
Yeah.
So that at the time, the Royal Hotel was pretty much, I mean, we're talking 1870s, the Royal Hotel was the last house on that stretch, the last building on Stanley Road. So
it would now be like at the beginning of the street.
Pretty much. It was just an expansive coastline right down to Hilbury Point at the corner where currently there's a nursing home. So yes, in those early days, the clubhouse moved. John Ball Senior was very unhappy because obviously it took away a lot of his income. He was snubbed and subsequently played. I think he played his golf at Liso.
Left the club?
I think so. I think he might have stayed, but his nose was out of joint, seriously out of joint. So he played his golf at Liso. Stephen Proctor, I tell you.
Yeah.
The course routing, that was the start of where things get a bit sticky with numbering and routing.
Yeah.
So we moved the clubhouse. There were a couple of other locations touted, but eventually that was decided upon as the place. And then what happened was initially in those early days of the move, I think they played an autumn meeting from the open routing that we play today. We played the 17th as a first. There were a couple of comps played like that.
Oh, really?
But it obviously didn't take. I don't think there's any club record of why, but it just didn't take, and they went back to the way it was. So actually we played what was their second as our first.
It's a strange, I mean, I don't want to digress too much on this, but it is a strange one that the members of Royal Liverpool play what they would consider the course, finishing on the 2 par 4s to finish.
Yeah.
And then in the Open, when the RNA come into town, you switch it up. I suppose that's just for drama, finishing on a par 5.
Yeah, there's several
easy
reasons.
to accommodate things.
Several reasons. Mostly, it was touted by Fred Hawtrey in the 50. Well, he was approached in 59. F.W. Hawtrey was approached in 59 to give a full sort of plan of what he, improvements, master plan basically. And one of those involved recommending for the 67 Open that starting, where it does today. But it was very close to happening, but didn't. They decided, no, we'll keep it the way it is. But they realised that the whole spectacle was getting bigger. Crowd movement was becoming a problem. And also, let's get down to brass tacks. It's a better finishing hole for the Open. It's more, the sight of it is excellent. So
it is right back in front of the clubhouse.
Right in front of the clubhouse. And also the distance between the 16th green and the 18th hole was, and the 17th tee and the 18th hole it was all a bit too close.
Yeah.
So as we know, they've got this amazing infrastructure now where you can walk over these bridges, and it's pretty incredible what they can do. But back in the day where it was on foot, it was they could see it was an issue with crowd movement.
Yeah.
So while they did in '67 decide to keep it that way, in '06 it was decided, no, let's do what we do today.
So we've got this course now that we've moved the clubhouse. What starts to change with the routing?
So this was in advance of the 1897 Open.
Yeah.
So the course, as I say, the boundaries were still in flux. What we lost going down Mel's Drive, which is, as you look at the clubhouse from the 16th green, Mel's Drive is behind the clubhouse, that long road that goes between Hoylake and West Kirby. And to your right, let's say, is West Kirby. And there was a whole stretch of land there that was the clubs. It was open, it was in play. There were a couple of holes that played down there and along the road. And we've got a hole called Road because it played by the road all the way, which is now the second hole. At the time, we lost that tract of land to housing, and there are now houses on there. But we had the choice to gain other parts of land to try and make up for the lost land. And at the time, I don't think it was a direct sort of either or choice, but there were two holes drawn up that would have gone out to Hilbury Point, right at the corner by the nursing home. Two holes actually planned, and they would have gone out and back. So kind of Turnberry-esque vibes, Pebble Beach on the cliff top stuff, which could have been extraordinary. But
more sensible minds prevailed.
So, somebody got cold feet. I think it might have been because the land was so unusable at the time. It was really tricky to make any use of it. Even the dune land that we use today was deemed, it was just too rough.
Has that had to have a lot of work done to it to make? Because you talked about it flooding quite a lot. I don't think it floods much now.
Not much now, no. But in those days, the marram grasses hadn't plugged the sand as much as it has today, so you had quite a lot of blown sand across the course. And those dunes would have been much wilder and harder to use. So really, it comes down to finances.
Dynamic dunes, the ones that move around.
Exactly. So they hadn't had time to sort of stabilise as much as they do today. But in those days, it would have been a big financial undertaking and quite risky to say, okay, we'll do two holes over there. We'll have to pour a load of effort into it to try and make them usable for golf.
And this was prior to actually moving a load of earth, wasn't it?
Absolutely not. Horse and cart, madness. Yeah, it would have been extreme. So instead it was decided to use the holes where we now got 5 and 6. So we bought this patch of land, that sort of triangle of land that plays as 5 and 6 today. And that was, we think Jack Graham was highly influential in the layout of those two holes, which are cool holes. 5 particularly is a great hole. So that was in advance of the 1897 Open. That patch of land, I should come back and say, there was one drawing done of a hole that recommended going up the old straight third, par 5. We now play as a dog leg, we'll come to that later, but up the old straight path 5 third, and then back again, straight in the same direction into the corner where the 5th green is today, but played from a tee right next to the other green.
Okay.
So just go back and forth, and it was called Football Field. And the reason it was named Football Field was because part of the land that was taken was the rugby club, Hoylake Rugby Club, rugby football. Yeah. And the captain was Harold Hilton.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there you go.
I wonder how they got that over the line when they sold it.
So, and apparently, Anthony Sherman was saying that patch of land is some of the best turf on the course.
Really?
By virtue, probably, of being
it had been looked
sports
after
field
in some way.
Sadly, it's not really in play these days. It's just short of the gorse on the left of 3.
Yeah.
It doesn't really come into play unless you really squiff one, like I do regularly. So there we go. Yeah.
We're not here to play golf. We're here to think and talk about it.
Yeah.
So we've kind of got the bare bones now. We've kind of developed an 18-hole routine. We've got the land that's 8-9, current 8-9, or open 10 and 11. I'm going to get so confused with all this stuff.
I know. I call them by the hole names. It's the only way to do it. I mean, you need a reference sheet with you when you're talking about this stuff. But
it's all very complicated. But sadly, most people will only know it in terms of open routing and how they see it on
which has a different routing this year. So.
What happens, between 1900 and say 1930? What kind of goes on in that period of time? I'm conscious that we've got a strict time limit you've set with your wife. So we've got. what happens? Fast forward that sort of
Yeah.
30 years. What kind of develops with the course in that time?
Well, interesting. 1897, first Open that they held. Stephen Proctor will go into all the competitions and stuff, but the amateur game was absolutely enormous at Hoylake. It really sprung
The birth of amateur golf. Well, not the birth.
Yeah,
but
well,
like,
sort of serious amateur, elite amateur play, an international amateur, and anyway, so 1897, the first one, and then there was some talk from Simpson, Fowler, others who would say that really the Open should only be contested over Hoylake and the Old Course.
Really?
It was held in
that
such
revered.
esteem.
Yeah. But they're very similar, like in terms of
They share some
they are
similarities.
not the most dramatic places when you look at them. They play fairly flat, but the nuances of the way the ball can bounce and roll, and you don't see that as much in other links courses as perhaps you see at Royal Liverpool and the Old Course.
They
Maybe.
do share some similarities. The change in elevation, clearly there isn't any.
Yeah.
Whereas St Andrews has got far more consistently choppy land than Hoylake does. But yeah, they were held in great regard. And from 1900 up until the First World War, I think we hosted another couple of Opens in short succession. And the course was developing. Holes were shifting, tees were being added. The game was developing in such a way that obviously we'd moved away from this idea of teeing up next to the hole, which was how it was in the very earliest days of the club, and now sort of these ideas of stretching the course, being longer, making the better use of the land. The dunes started to come into play with new tees being set up into the dunes and playing out of the dunes. Rather than trying to make a green site in the dunes, it was much more about playing out of them with a tee because it was easy to do. Around 1913 was quite a big change. The hole that we know as the 10th, the D hole, which plays as a sort of right to left dogleg up to a raised green.
Wonderful golf hole. That.
Great hole. Great green. Really great green. Used
Treacherous.
to play treacherous green, absolutely. No need for bunkers on that green. Really good. You played over a strip of bunkers that were straight in front of the tee. 150 yards off the tee. These Three Sisters bunkers, which remained until the 50s. But you played straight over these into sort of oblivion, a blind drive, and then down the hill to a green that now is a sand scrape in front of the championship tee of our fifth hole.
Oh, right, so it went straight on.
Yeah, so it's like
to...
a bowl green. As you know, in those days, like a bowl green was great because of lack of irrigation and those things. It would hold water and get fertile, and you could, whatever else. So, it was a bowl green. So you played a straight hole, which is a bit longer than today's, but it was just straight away down the hill and into a bowl green. Subsequently, they decided, how about we go a bit risky and we put a green on top of this dune? And you can actually see the dune in a sort of caricature sketch by somebody in the Sphere in Tatler from about 1906, I think it was. It was those News of the World showing you how the last round played out. They're great pictures, hand-drawn things. Yeah. And you can just see the dune to the left of the 10th in this picture, which would then go on to be used as the green in 1913. So that was quite cool.
Do we know who was in charge of that?
It's hard to believe that Harry Colt, who was a prolific amateur player at the time and visited Hoylake lots and lots, hard to believe that he didn't have a part to play considering his later work at the club and how it resembled that. Yeah. But there's no fixed evidence. We thought we'd found some stuff the other day. Jasper, our mutual friend, had stumbled upon some stuff, research he was doing, and we thought we had a Colt reference, but it wasn't. So we have to credit Jack Graham and other members for that change, which is now become.
In terms of all this, is it all minute books? How, because this is like, you have a substantial amount of knowledge, and the club has a substantial amount of knowledge of these changes.
Yeah.
Is it minute books? Because we're not even anywhere near the era, which I hope we're going to go on to shortly, of the RAF photos and all that stuff that we can use. I mean, photography was probably still, course photography was still blossoming around about that time. So
it was the early days. The club has got comprehensive records, as you say, minute books. I don't think it's light reading. But the best record of the course's evolution was released by Anthony Schoen in conjunction with Richard Latham. And that is what I consider the best record of the club, the course's evolution that we have. But it's not absolute. And he would tell you this, Anthony, it loves it. I was with him the other day poring over some new stuff that we'd found. All the time we're finding new stuff in this digital age where just by virtue of searching and being patient, you can uncover new stuff that...
Like newspaper clippings.
Pictures, this sort of thing. And sometimes it's fun to come across pictures that corroborate a hunch.
Yeah.
Stuff that may have been referenced in text, maybe in passing.
Well, you've done us a little thing that we're going to add on to this podcast, a little 10-minute vignette video of a hunch that you had that we'll add to the show notes. I mean, it truly was exceptional when you sent that across. I was like, this is nerdery at its absolute finest.
Yes.
But please do check out the show notes for this little video that Joe has made on the 12th, which we'll go on to shortly. But it's amazing when you get these little hunches and they work out to be true.
It's lovely. It's a light bulb moment. We had a similar one when the new hole that we have now, the Little Eye hole, which was formerly Rushes. When
did they change that name, by the way? Because we were calling it Rushes in our film, which we made like 2 years ago. Because they just finished it and we called it the Rushes.
Yeah, it's about a year ago now, I think.
Oh,
it
right.
was
So it's not
decided that, I think in the days when the Dowie was changed into what we have today from its old, the slightly mean setup of the hole, which had out of bounds and everything else.
Yeah.
When that was changed, Dowie was kept. And there were a lot of members who felt that because the hole had changed so much, that keeping Dowie wasn't the right thing to do and we should have come up with another name. In this respect, because the hole has been so changed, flipped 180 and plays in a totally different way, that it was finally decided to retire the name Rushes and take
And
Little Eye.
any significance to Little Eye?
Yes, Little Eye is there are 3 islands. The main island that you can see behind the hole is called Hilbury, and that is actually the name of the 12th hole. For sensible reasons.
Yeah.
And then you have Middle Eye and Little Eye, which I hope are self-explanatory. And yes, Middle Eye wouldn't have quite conveyed the message, whereas Little Eye, yes, because it's a little hole, it's devilish, and it sits behind the green. So.
Okay, wonderful. Digression sorted. Yeah. So let's rewind slightly.
Rewind. So the 20s. The 20s is where it gets funky, because things were progressing nicely in the 10s. The war came, World War One. Everything stopped. So everything stopped in World War One, and golf was put on the back burner. But then when things got going again, it was the first record we have of an architect being consulted, a professional. So Harry Colt was brought in to do his thing, and it started in 1923 and would carry on until the Second World War. And we're unsure of whether he continued to advise post-war, but he certainly didn't do any work on the course post-war. I don't think he did work anywhere post-war. I'm not sure about that, though. Adam Lawrence may know differently. But, so Harry Colt was brought in 23, and he put together a master plan for the whole course, and many of the recommendations were put into play. And some of the key changes were the 8th hole, the par 5 that plays out to the far boundary of the property. I should note that before Harry Colt came along and before we secured the boundaries of the club, actually that 8th hole where we play the green now, it was open beyond that. So there was more duneland beyond that could have been brought into the course.
It's housing now, isn't it?
Yeah, it's housing, yeah. Yeah. Before that, another example of where the boundaries were finally set, but could have gone even further.
Yeah.
So anyway, Harry Colt recommended that what was the old 8th green, which was tucked right into the core on the left side in the lower lying ground, which of course was another example of a green site that would take water rather than repel it.
Which I think is more important in links golf. Like, it's so interesting hearing you talk about this, because in parkland golf, you'd think the opposite. It's like, we don't want to retain too much
Absolutely,
water.
where it's
but
abundant.
links golf is kind of, we need to get these greens low.
Totally, to try and hold the stuff, because I think Hoylake sits on many tens of feet of sand. It might be 100 feet of sand. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But anyway, it drains very well, particularly with the drainage system that's in there and has been used since pre-1900. But Harry Colt at the time blazing a trail for how to create greens that would retain water, that sat on a raised portion of land. And that technique has worked for many, many years, but sadly it's run its course, because you take somewhere like Portrush, for example, that had to have a lot of rebuild of greens. They were Colt greens, and there was a technique he used which involved this sort of using a semi-porous, like clayish mixture.
Yeah, sand on clay, wasn't it, to try and retain some
retains some water, but over time and footfall and just entropy, whatever happens, it compacts the ground, and actually it holds too much water.
Yeah.
So in certain cases, greens need rebuilding to try and get rid of that. But at the time, it was incredible, and obviously lasted a century in good shape. So yeah, he did the 8th hole, and he did the an entirely new 11th hole, Alps, which used to play as a blind hole, but at the time, blind stuff was becoming deeply unpopular. People were hating blind shots. So yeah, he redid the 11th and teed off the 12th from a completely different tee, and redid the 12th Hilbury hole. And the 13th, subsequently, a few years later, he was invited back to rebuild the Rushes hole. And then he also moved the 17th green, which was absolutely inspired. It was always close to the road, but he moved it another sort of 80 yards further down the road and completely set up the bunkering in a way such that it became what was, I think, the best flat land architected hole.
Really?
Yeah.
That good?
So good. Just flat land architecture 101. Well, there's no getting around it. The peril of the out of bounds beyond the green, because it was right next to the pavement and the road of the time. There's no getting away from it. That was what made the essence of the hole. Subsequently, in 1999, I think it was, Donald Steele was given the remit to move the green away from the road because it was dangerous. Yeah. So in advance of the Open, there were fears that that it would cause problems, legal and otherwise. So it was decided to move the green away from the road. Sadly, there's no record of us, the club, being asked to do it. It was the club decided preemptively that it could become a problem, so did it anyway. So it wasn't not like anyone was strong-armed into it, but it was just slightly fearful.
Yeah, foreboding.
Yeah, so it's a shame. We lost quite what was a very, very special hole, and that was in my time of playing, so I remember the old one very well. Very well. What a match play hole. I mean, so good. But I have to say, there's nothing like seeing a ball hit tarmac.
Oh, it bounces, doesn't it?
Oh, wow. Everything's happened on that hole. The
elasticity of the ball really shows itself when it hits tarmac.
I have played in a Tuesday night Stableford with my dad in about 1998 and watched the ball go over the road and go under a car and get spat out back onto the course.
Oh, nice.
And this is in the days of, Bellata 90. And when you go look at the ball, mangled. But
unputtable after that. But,
great days.
With the exception of a few little, like you say, there was some poetry movements and things. Would the Harry Colt routing be, and obviously the exception of the flip of the little eye that the old rush is, your 15th, Open 17, are we recognising the Harry Colt course in kind of its bare bones as it is today, or is much more changed?
I think it's close. I think the course routing sort of settled. We got in 59, as I said earlier, Fred Hawtrey was consulted, and he came in and said, what we need to do is we're going to amalgamate the old straight third and the old fourth into a single hole, which we have today, which is our long third, and it plays as that sort of arcing, hooking dogleg left. The green of that has subsequently been changed by Donald Steele as part of a lengthening process to move because we moved the tee shorter. But the F.W. Hawtrey 60s changes in advance of the 67 Open involved that. So they merged these two holes. He built a new par 3, which we play today, called New, and it's the 4th hole. And that's the first par 3 on the course. And the beauty is that gets you into the better... the more exciting, great par 3, really, really good. It sits in the shadow of the 11th, which has got the glamour of the beach side and stuff. Yeah. But the reality is the 4th is as good, I think, as a
it's
whole.
A sparkling par 3.
Super hole. And that was a bit of genius, because really the previous par 3 that it usurped, or whatever you want to call it, was slightly uninspiring. It had lost its teeth, really. It was called Cop, and it had a cop in front of the green and a strip bunker. I mean, subsequently had lots more bunkers added around it and that sort of thing. But in the earliest days, it was just a big old rectangular Victorian green that played over a trench and a turf wall. And it didn't have much going for it. And especially after they moved the tee, because it used to play out of bounds on the left. Blah, blah, blah. Anyway.
Yeah, well, we got to where we kind of roughly where we are today. There's been a few changes. I think the modern changes are fairly well covered, so we don't want to go too into depth around what's been done recently and sort of in the 90s. What I do want to know, because I know you put these time limits on the job. I could go for another hour, which is why we're skipping over 70 years of history. But I'd just like to know, tell me a little bit about how you dig out all this stuff in terms of the old, RAF aerials and the importance of all that sort of imagery in the last sort of 5, 6, 7 minutes. How you use all that to kind of discover all this stuff that you get.
Aerial images, there's no doubt about it, the sort of prevalence of aerial imagery and the archives now being digitized and being opened to people, architects, anybody who's seriously interested, has revolutionized how we see courses, particularly of this age, of a certain maturity. What I particularly like about Hoylake is that we've got a 30s aerial. There are lots of 40s.
That's rare, isn't it?
It is rare. Anything before the World War II spate of aerial stuff is quite a rarity, particularly anything that's good, and usable.
Yeah.
This is a bit small, this one we have. It's up on the wall in the club upstairs. And we took a scan of it, and I tried to do what I could to make it better, smooth it out, get rid of some of the sort of noise in it.
Like when you're in one of those movies where they're like, enhance.
Exactly. That's becoming closer and closer to reality. And it used to be scoffed at, but now it's getting close. But not with aerials. There's nothing you can do with this. Anyway, so...
if there's no detail, what are you going to do with it?
No, exactly. But looking back over the years, what you see from this 30s aerial is that these white marks that can sometimes look just like a blemish or a lens flare or whatever else, turns out that they really are sand. And you get these enormous long strips of sand. So you can see right round the outside of the practice ground, the field, is just this almost unbroken ring of sand.
Really?
And what happened was with the trenches that we were talking about, where you next to cop turf walls that keeps your, maybe a flood defence, maybe a sort of wall to keep your cattle in your field, actually produce these trenches, which of course where the mud has come from.
Like borrow pits.
Borrow pit, basically. And in the early days, as we said, there was no sort of plugging of the ground. It was the blown sand was quite an issue. So it would just be swept across the course with any kind of wind. And these would collect sand in them. So they became these sort of natural bunkers. And some of them were over time filled in, others were kept going as a more long-lasting feature. And then as the fashion for sort of strip bunkers waned, they became separated into these strings of separate bunkers. And you can just see the evolution of these bunkers over the years, starting with this 30s stuff and going right through to 60s, 70s, and just seeing how the bunkering has become more sparse, bunker shapes, styles, everything else has changed. And it's gone in hand with equipment and fashions. And it's just amazing to look back at what they did in the old days, what they considered a brutal challenge. There's quite a sort of low turf wall, right through to now being these sort of huge towering stacked sod faces, which are taller than your head. And, modern equipment has made us have to do that.
It's very strange. We talk about it, plug for the Cookie Jar film on Hoylake. We talk about it in the Hoylake film that we did a couple of years back now, where I think Royal Liverpool has been a golf club that has never been afraid to adapt, which I think is one of its strengths. Really, like you say, it was on a fairly flat bit of land, and they continue to be progressive and change and try and make it as good as it can be. And I think it's probably the strength of the club is that it did always adapt and try and stay ahead of advances of technology, and never really just stayed in the past and think, this is just what we are. It's just kind of...
No, never rested. I think it's ambitious, I think, and it's to be commended. As we know, not every change that's made to a club makes it better. There are inarguable changes that have happened to Hoylake that I would say have made it better. Bernard Darwin famously did not like Harry Colt's change to the 12th.
Really?
He lamented the loss of the old 12th. But subsequently...
It's a bloody great hole.
Maybe the best on the course. So, with time, sometimes the dust settles and the naysayers sort of disappear into the ether, and what's left is a great legacy. It's not always the case, though. Not every change is successful. But I think we give them time, we let them settle, and then go to it again if club finances allow. We just keep improving. Keep looking at
as a parting gift, Joe. You're a Hoylake man and boy. I take it you're going to be watching the Open.
Of course.
Anyone who's going to go there, anyone's lucky enough to visit, where's the place to go and set yourself up? Or are you walking the course with a group? What are you doing?
It depends on what your style is. Are you a sort of walk and talk person, or are you sit
you Ken on the
stationary.
course, or are you?
Yeah,
Or
exactly.
you featured holes coverage.
Precisely. Are you in the tower? I would say, having seen the new stand, the stand at the back of the new little eye hole, there is no getting away from it. That is going to be the place to be. It's a little bit like the back of the Eden Green at the old course last year.
Yeah, where you can see lots of stuff going on. And
hot property. If you can get to the top of that stand in the corner, you've got behind you've got extraordinary views. You've got the hole, which if the wind blows is going to cause chaos.
Yeah.
You've got to look down the 18th tee straight over the top of the big players who are coming off this new back tee, which makes the hole 600 plus. And you've got to look down arguably the best hole on the course, which is the 12th.
Yeah.
So, and of course the new tee on the 13th, which is also 600 plus.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you'll have the sun on your face all day there.
I would say so. Cream up, good style. Take a picnic. Don't leave your seat, otherwise you won't get it back.
Yeah. Take a bottle to win.
Exactly.
Joe McDonnell, you've been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on the pod. If you didn't restrict these absolutely ludicrous time restraints on us, I think we could have gone for hours.
Certainly could.
Thank you very much indeed.
Nice one, Tom. Pleasure.
Do you want to say adios?
Adios.
Watch this.